Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to a morning episode. I have to get this episode done before 10 a.m. And so I thought of talking about an emotion that I felt, and then I thought about what if the species, has a similar experience or dilemma. I would like to share the context for this episode from my own metaphysical and mystical perspective. I want to share with the viewers something that has been a part of my sight and analysis since the beginning. Since my earliest memories, there has been accompanying feelings. It's as if a person has an initial emotion on their existence, even though the child is born and doesn't have a personality yet. But it's as if the sensation of the whole moment registers. Notably, in these talks of mine, I have explained that when I was younger, before 2011, I felt that I was in some sort of karmic exile. And I would say that I didn't have the understanding I have now. I didn't have the ability to discriminate between the inner realms and outer realms as I do have now. And I remember just feeling this force, it's as if imagine you are trapped inside a force field. Or imagine, Midas. There's King Midas in legends. And it's pretty much this guy who touches everything and it becomes gold, And so it's as if he doesn't have control over the outcome. He has control, but the control leads to the absence of control. And it could be the case that some of the most, let's say, capable people who feel they are in control, they feel they're not in control of their control. Okay, I know what song to play. There we go. So, anyways, since my youth, I had this feeling of karmic exile till 2011. And I would say it was a sort of feeling where I didn't feel I could be myself in the outer realms, so I had in some sense not considered the outer realms, when life gives a human being too many, let's say, failures or setbacks, at some point they feel it's a sign. Now, I am reminded of this idea in yoga where there's 4 types of yoga: Jnana yoga, Karma yoga, Raja yoga, Bhakti yoga. Now, I guess for the title of this episode, honestly, there was a moment where I just felt people are like, is Mr.Within being emotional right now? I just had this feeling that what if somebody can do all the right things and not get the right outcome, which could be an implication they haven't done the right things. But I thought about, a member of the human species feeling incapable of accessing, let's say, the greater emotional state of all of us. Guys, this song is actually too heavy. I think I'm gonna cry. The idea of feeling that a person feeling they don't deserve. And when we look at the human life, the reason here, I'll say it this way, the reason I shared the 4 types of yoga is because Bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion, which is considered with love of reality, of the supreme reality. We have Karma yoga, which is the yoga of action, and then we have Raja yoga, which is the yoga of knowledge, and Jnani yoga is a unique type of yoga where I would say it's kind of like you're being privately tutored by the logos. I don't have too many comments on Jnani yoga, but I wanted to say that if a human being has entered the system of world and the dimension of work and the dimension of knowledge are active, it's as if a human being works and knows, until it feels something is missing. And so really, it's as if the intellect can go on playing its games, rising and falling. But I think deep down, human beings, they seek an emotional connection to life, not an analytical connection, and not just a physical connection. The remarkable thing is that we have feelings. If we didn't have feelings, we could probably be externally an advanced civilization. But it would be a sort of soulless advanced civilization. I feel that it is possible that a human being who does not feel synchronized to their, let's say, original will, they will feel they don't deserve. And so this is huge in human psychology. There's this concept of self-sabotage that Carl Jung talked about. And really, it's like this, that the human being is like a container, is like, okay, let's just, for the sake of metaphor, the human being is like a file cabinet, or let's say it's like a video gallery. And this video gallery, there's events, there's films of past moments, it's like the human being technically, from let's say a Buddhist perspective, you could consider a human being had a past life. Before they were born. But a human being that is born and, let's say, goes through time, it's as if yesterday was the past life of who I am today. And it could be that in our past lives, in our past moments of being a conscious experiencer of this vast unconscious place of existence. It's just, what do we do with the feeling of feeling we don't deserve life, whatever angle? Whether it's, let's say, love, knowledge, work, whatever. And I notice, at least in myself, this is a kind of, I guess, if I'm truly honest, a bit of a self-depreciating episode. But pretty much, I had this feeling that the intellect, or my intellect, had in some sense concluded for itself. It's as if my mind had made up its mind. It's like how would I say it? It's as if I noticed a part of me had emotionally been convinced that I am unworthy and undeserving of love. And this emotion was such like a mysterious traveler to my moment, where I wondered what part of my mind feels so incomplete that it does not even feel it deserves the completion of its future. It's like the person wondering, is there a part of me destroying me as much as a part of me creating me? And in my own, let's say, analysis of my psyche, where I was like, why do I feel I do not deserve, an emotionally liberating future? And I realized it's because I had been, or I would say on some level, some part of me was so convinced of my own value in the past that the future didn't have even a part, like even my view of the future, it's like it wasn't, like, how would I say it? It's like, imagine if in every moment the mind is drawing itself. This episode is pretty much me noticing a picture my mind drew in one moment, and I wondered why, right? And then I thought, okay, to me, if sometimes when there's problems in my life, I have this bad habit of not sharing with others. But I thought about, if it's a collective problem, what do we do? That means, let's say you're someone, it's like a person being like, okay, I'm unworthy of love, I don't deserve. The greatness of my vision. And so it's like the person could be like, let's say, succumb to that thought as an individual. But when I think about what does the species deserve, it is so much beyond my acceptances and rejections. It's as if like the species deserves, the infinite potential of every human mind. And it was strange, where I was like, what if there was a sort of situation on Earth where every person on the planet had to feel worthy of love, or the species would get destroyed or something, right? So I projected from my mind a sort of setting where I was like, if we had to fix this problem for the species, what would it be? And then for the first time, my mind was like, okay, go beyond the boundaries of your acceptance and let the eyes enter new worlds. And so I thought about it. Where does the unworthiness of the moment come from? And sometimes it could be like you could have an analysis of it. The person could be like, okay, I haven't loved people, I have been selfish, I have been stubborn, I have been ignorant, I have been arrogant. Let's say, the religions would say 7 deadly sins, like and so the person may look at their past and be like, okay, so far how the movie has played out, it seems like this character doesn't deserve, for example. And then I thought about, regardless of someone not deserving something, again, where is the limitation, right? Where is the original momentum beyond, let's say, an idea of unworthy or undeserving? And this might be a strange thing I'm gonna say, but I feel there's a truth to it. That a human being can love others without realizing they don't love themselves. And a person cannot love themselves if they don't trust themselves. So it's as if, on some level, if life was a film, up to this point, it's as if the individual is like, okay, some point in this film, I distrusted my being. Now, I thought about it also in this way. Okay, so what? Let's say a person feels they don't deserve something, right? So it's like, what are the possibilities of how the moment will go forth? They will either go forth and they will not attain, let's say they will not access the future. Let's say somebody feels unworthy of the future. It's as if like you're like, okay, one case scenario is I don't access the future, the other case scenario is somehow I access, so it's pretty much two choices, whether we let's say love the world or don't love the world, or whether we think we're worthy of love. It's pretty much a binary kind of choice, right? It's like either there's love or there is no love, This is I don't know how to context this thing I'm going to say right now, but maybe there's too many human beings. I don't think I'm the only one, but it's as if when a person feels unworthy of love, they also feel unworthy to exist. And if a person feels unworthy to exist, it's as if you've entered a sort of limbo, There was a suggestion, this idea is in, I would say, different, let's say ancient traditions have different approaches to this. But for example, in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, there's like 7 levels of heaven, 7 levels of hell, and then there's earth, and then there's the limbo state. the limbo state is kind of like neither worthy, neither unworthy, you know. It's like, it's kind of like three rooms, a good room, a bad room, and like a hallway in between. Song's too heavy. Okay, let me approach this differently. Let's say we have a human being. I'm drawing a stick figure on a piece of paper right now. And let's say this human being feels unworthy. Just unworthy, not unworthy of love. Let's just say the idea of unworthy. Then the question comes, in some sense, unworthy of what? And let's say the person is basing their worth on something, right? Let's say a human being has never seen, like, let's say an orphan has never seen, let's say, the love of, let's say, parents, right? And then the orphan feels on some level being born as, let's say, being found as an orphan is in some sense like they are unworthy, or it's as if like sometimes in life when a person doesn't have some things and let's say the others in the world has something, that unworthiness comes. So the concept of worth is like the most important thing. It's as if a person's like, okay, why do I feel I'm unworthy of deserving love? And then it's like, okay, let me see what how am I considering worth, or what is the worth of my worth? The concept of what is something worth is a sort of measurement. And we cannot measure if we don't have more than 2 moments. So it's in some sense the idea of the past. So it's like a person feeling worthy or unworthy is pretty much how they are measuring their past. So I would say, if I was to explain, why in that moment I felt undeserving or unworthy of deserving love, I would say it would be as if some part of my mind in that moment was like, okay, the way I'm interpreting the past, it's kind of worthless to really what the future means. We don't say this, but really psychology or human psychology is a sort of effort-based balance. It's as if just like somebody trying to walk between let's say, tightrope from the Niagara Falls, or like, between 2 skyscrapers. It's as if like they need to have a sort of going forth effort, but they also need to have a balance in accordance to being conscious of how the whole moment is held. Let's say, I'll be poetic, mystically poetic here, and say, let's say there was from a Buddhist yogic perspective, where the idea of past lives and reincarnation still is alive. I would say that, let's say somebody in their past life was a king. Okay, they were like an actual king, or like an emperor. And let's say in their next life, they appeared as like somebody who had nothing, of going from one lifetime of having everything, you know, in regards to the human archetype. Then imagine your next lifetime, the person has nothing. Now, so the person starts with nothing, but they have a memory of having everything, you know. Or let me give a more bizarre example. Okay, let's say there was a cruel, vicious person, okay, and this cruel, vicious person was born like back in the day in medieval times in like a royal family. For example, in Game of Thrones, there was that like messed up king, Joffrey. And imagine, that kid was born into a royal family, but imagine in his past lives he was like the cruelest of the cruelest, Pretty much what I'm trying to say is like the past had a different value system, and so the present has a different value system, and the person's trying to understand the value of their future, and it's like the new life is giving you an example, and let's say the person's in that Buddhic example, the person's past life is giving it value. Okay, here, I'll make it easy. We have let's say person XYZ, and then person XYZ, in their past life. Let's say we have person B, and in their past life, person B was person A, and it's like, imagine in one lifetime the person was bad, and imagine in another lifetime the person was good. So it would be like past, let's say, bad, present, good, and then person's wondering, okay, what do I deserve in the future? Okay, I got a perfect example. Imagine somebody in a reincarnation setting of thought, right? In their past life, they were a sinner. In their present life, they're a saint. Or in their past life, they were a saint. In their present life, they're a sinner. And then the person is like, okay, what does this person deserve? What is the person's worth? And it's like there's a conflict. There's a conflict. And so here's the interesting thing. If the person identifies with their past, then they can find, like, the mind has such a creative ability that it can justify the past in accordance to the present, right? The person could be like, man, I was a sinner in my past life. Maybe that's why I don't deserve, this or something, But the idea is, where is the driver of the moment? And the driver of the moment is in the present, You know what it is? Being a human being is like we're this multidimensional being that forgot it's multidimensional, and as it lives life, the divinity of life is how it's remembering, more of its dimensions. On some level, human beings, this is part of my observation, because we're evolutionary creatures, like our desires are very simple, right? It's like the person's hungry, there's food in front of them, they're like, I want food. But imagine a person who's hungry and there's food in front of them, but they can't eat. Like, they don't want to eat. Very beautiful girl named Hillary, and I had a crush on her, but I was too shy to do anything. And I remember, like, years after high school, I remember I saw, like, on social media a picture of her, and she had become anorexic, right? And I was so stunned because it was like something so beautiful, had become something unnecessary, externally speaking. And then I thought about it, and I was like, look at how fascinating life is, that on some level it doesn't matter what we have, how we feel about our future, it suggests what will happen, It's not important to just have thoughts on the future, but to wonder about how emotions relate to it. Somebody who is, let's say, hungry, and there's food in front of them, but they feel like, I'm too fat, I shouldn't eat this food, It's really like a psychological thing. It's as if it's as if the mind is trying to convince the body, or how would I say it? It's like, this might be strange to say, but it seems like the truth of thought leads to an emotion. There's this Zen story where there was this Zen master living in this village, and next door to the Zen master's temple, there was this young girl who was living with her parents, and this young girl went to the market, fell in love with, like, this merchant guy, and I'm relaying the Zen story, and pretty much she gets pregnant and she comes home. And the parents are so shocked, and they're like, oh my God, how dare you, without our permission, do something like this to the daughter. And so the parents are so strict and intense that when they confront the daughter and says, who's the father, because the daughter is in love with, like, let's say, the boy in the market, right? She says it's the Zen master next door, right? And the Zen master is just this dude who every day, like, rakes leaves, like, sits and meditates, like, lives the most simplest of lives. And so the parents, after the kids become, like, I don't know, let's say 8 years old, 9 years old, the family sees like they don't have the financial capabilities, so it's like the parents of the girl take the kid to the Zen master and say, how dare you touch our daughter, you're a sick man, you don't deserve, da-da-da-da-da, and they tell the Zen master that you have to take this kid, and like pretty much they say, fuck you gotta take this kid, like this messed up kind of. And the Zen master is like in the story, he's such an enlightened person that he is not attached to the outer realms, so he's just in every moment, he's just silently there, And so, I think he says, what does he say in the story? He says something like, so it is, something like that. Now, what happens is, that kid, who is brought to the Zen Master's temple is strangely blessed because this Zen Master teaches this young kid how to meditate and, in some sense, all the virtues of Buddhism and all of this, right? And so the girl next door, there's something, a part of her where the guilt is unbearable, and she's like getting crushed under the guilt of her own lie, like that's the bad thing about lying, you kind of get crushed by them sometimes, emotionally crushed. So she can't take it anymore, and she goes to the parents, and she's like, "It wasn't the Zen master, da 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 da." And the parents are like, "Oh my God, you foolish girl! We just disturbed the Zen master's life out of nowhere." And so they go back to the Zen temple, the mother and father of the girl, and the parents of the girl, and they're like, "Forgive us, we made a mistake. We want the kid back." And the Zen master says, "So it is," and the kid's so enlightened and liberated, where the kid just goes with the moment, right? And pretty much the whole moral of the Zen story was that the person was in a state where the person was not attached to the conditions of the changing environment. So it was another way of saying, if something good happened, the person was like, "Okay, so it is." If something bad happened, the person would be like, "So it is." So it was as if like the person had attained it. The Zen master in the story was at a state of mind where he was not playing the game of, am I worthy, am I not worthy? It's as if he had recognized, let's say, the peaks and troughs of karma, had realized that things come and go, and it's like, the same time we are here present as a living being, it's like, the world is living its life as well, and technically the world is living through our minds, because our minds are aware of what happens. Now, let's say a person, I'll bring it back to just the view of just one lifetime, from the beginning of birth, and let's say to the point of death. Let's say the person in 10 years, let's say in 20 years, the person has had 20 important life events. And let's say in these 20 life events, right, it's as if, like, let's say 15 of them have been moments where the person has, like, their free will has not had the freedom of its outcome in the moment. So it's another way of saying, like, some of our memories are incomplete. And because they're incomplete, they have a sort of emotional, they carry the emotion of that incompletion. So let's say in 20 years, the person has had 15, let's say, inefficient moments, and let's say 5 efficient moments, right? And then they're wondering about, okay, what is the next 20 years going to be like, right? And what do I deserve in the next 20 years, right? And I would say it's as if, like, pretty much, what do we do with an incomplete past? Something very spectacular about consciousness, the conscious human being, is that it can change its mind. And that's kind of like the role of knowledge. It's like the more a person knows, it's like the deeper dimensions of meaning there is to what they already know. If someone is feeling unworthy of love, it could be, let's say, something in their past convinced them of that. Because really, if we look at life, it's kind of like a neutrality, right? The child is born without having a personality, meaning it's as if the unnamed child is neither good or bad. I wondered why religion would say, children go to heaven, And I thought about like, oh, okay, it's because the child doesn't have a personality, or it doesn't have enough of a discrimination to know that it can decide. And that's the power we have to, in some sense, combat, let's say, the inefficiency of our own past, right? Where we have a free will and we can choose to recontextualize the moment. The person's like, okay, I felt unworthy of something in the future because in the past there were examples of my mind of feeling unworthy of it. You know, and it's not like the person can say, I'm worthy of everything, right? I mean, the person can say it and think it. I mean, in the New Age community, there is that mentality. You know, those who experience through the context of oneness, they feel they deserve everything because they are everything. But I feel that it's like, you know, this is the most important thing about life, whoever you are listening to me. And if you're younger listening to me, it's like you have an advantage, you know. And the advantage is that in every moment, the reason why there is courage necessary, you know, they don't make courage a necessity, but I feel they should, you know. It's like the free will is here to kind of dictate what kind of memories our future self will have. So in some sense, in every moment of life, based on how our attention moves, let's say the brain simulates a sense of self that becomes a memory. So in some sense, it's like, what is the quality? What is the quality of past self-creation for the present that's wondering if it deserves the future? You know, it's like the quality of memories you're leaving behind for your future self. For example, my future self is going to be like, man, I talked a lot, you know. You know, imagine I finished the 10,000 talks in this lifetime, and then, you know, so let's say some very spiritual person comes to me and says, Mr. Within, what are you going to do after this life? You gave 10,000 talks. And I'll be like, I'll probably, you know, incarnate as the silence of the, you know. Really what it is it's the collection of our memories. Think of as if when I was a kid, I'll say this to the viewers, you know, let me create some, you know, character development for this talk. When I was young, you know, I have a twin brother, and when we were in Iran, we would stay at my grandmother's place, and my grandmother had this yard. And I remember my twin brother had found this blue rock in the yard, and ever since he had found the blue rock in the yard, everybody, me, my brother, and I had a smaller cousin, and there was also a family friend who was there living with us. So it was as if all four of us would spend all the time in the yard looking for things, right? Looking for rocks, right? And I'll say this, so I ended up having this habit of wherever I go, I grab a rock, right? And I made a rock collection, and then at some point I realized this shit's getting too heavy. You know, the downside of a, you know, rock collection is like when you want to move it. But I had this habit of kind of like, you know, collecting these rocks. I still have the rock collection. And so the reason I'm sharing this is because I find that what the mind is, poetically speaking, is a self-collection. And in every moment that we experience life, the brain is collecting a sample of its own ability. And so the question comes, let's say a person I said at first, like in 20 years, the person has 20 major events, but imagine in 20 years, the person has 200,000 instances of self, right? So imagine in 20 years of life, a child has 200,000 selves collected, you know. And this concept of lucky or unlucky, or let's say deserving, undeserving, blessed, or let's say unblessed. It's like we are an archive of how we have been a human being so far, of instances of how we have been a human being. And I feel that in 200, let's say in 20 years of life, there's 200,000, moments of self. And in those 200,000 moments of self, it's not like the person in the present remembers all those instances where their brain was projecting their self, right? So it's as if the brain, let's say the brain has identified with a sequence of its memories. For example, in those 20 years, out of those 200,000 memories, let's say, I don't know, the person's identifying with 20 of them consciously, or maybe more, maybe less, whatever. But the idea is that we are selecting out of this self-collection of memory which instances get to paint the moment's value, the present moment's value. So on some level, I think this, at least this is so far my conclusion, that the resolution to this idea that a human being has this feeling of being, let's say, unworthy of something, or unworthy of deserving love, it's really what memories we are identifying from the present. It's another way of saying, like, I don't want to say like you summon the past and you evoke the present, but I would say, like, let me just use the word projection for both. Let's say it's like right now I'm sitting here, I think about myself like 10 years ago, and I think about like who I was then, and it's really what I'm trying to get to is that it's what we choose. So just like we can choose to move our body, we can choose through which of the emotional contexts of our memories we function. It's like right now as I'm speaking, it's not just let's say ideas or subjects in my inner realms where I'm sharing. There's like an emotional context to the whole thing. There's this quote from Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj where it's a very powerful quote, and it says, whatever you come across, go beyond. And in order to go beyond how, let's say, the moment projects or presents itself, it's as if like a release beyond the memory is the only way where the person can release themselves from a conceptual expectation of the future. People consider that they are thoughts. People think they're thoughts, but how can a thought think? But if we take the view that, okay, there's a past, there's a present, there's a future, and if we have this view that at the same time we're this temporary entity in an unknown world, and it comes this view that the person in the present cannot know their worth because life is not finished. Let's say if we wanted an accurate meaning of life, it would be as if we need to complete it and then be able to index it from the beginning in contrast to the end. So as long as we don't know how the future will happen, we cannot be certain of the conclusion of the present. And so we can say that unworthiness is the illusion cast by the past, by past memories that have not realized the future remains as an unknown. Who knows? Let's say a person lives with this notion that they are unworthy, again, unworthy of the future. And imagine you have this sense of absence of worth, and then what happens? Suddenly something happens in the future and the person has a reset, a worthiness reset. The purpose I find specifically for human life, in contrast to, let's say, lesser species, is that lesser species are in the slumber of how big the world is actually. Right? When I look at, for example, birds and squirrels, it's as if their ecosystem is enough, their instincts is enough. You don't see birds feeling unworthy or worthy. You don't see squirrels feeling undeserving or deserving. Right? It's like lesser species, they are pretty much their environment channeled through, their body. But the human being is not just here to fit into a known life, but I would say to wonder about an unknown life. So it's like the role of the human species is to interact with the unknown because our intelligence can recognize it. Lesser species don't care about the unknown. We are the only species that is, what is it? They say there was language acquisition, and ever since there's language acquisition, it's as if we're living in more worlds than one. There was this moment when I was looking up, let's say, ancient wisdom traditions, and for example, there's a commonality in, let's say, the humility factor of a lot of these esoteric and spiritual traditions. And for a second I was like, oh my God, it seems like those people who are acting enlightened are acting as if the past is not a factor. In yogic thought, they say those who are enlightened are similar to children. And I was wondering, okay, how? Right? And the way it is as if the child doesn't care for its past until there's a personality. The personality is the relationship to a past and memory. So if a person doesn't have a personality, it's like what sort of image of self could there be? If we don't have the outline of a self, then there's no type of self anymore. There's no worthiness or unworthiness. So to me, it was like, the enlightened are living as if the past doesn't exist. And if the past doesn't exist, what are we? Where are we left? Where are You know, in the New Age community, you have people like Emoji and Eckhart Tolle who tell people to come to the here and now. And everybody celebrates, yeah, we are in the here and now, we're supreme consciousness, all of us, yay. You know, but I sometimes think as if like they're not realizing the intensity of the implication that everything is just present. If everything is just present, the past is insignificant as much as the future. You know, it's as if eternity is an eternal being can only exist in a present. You know, it's as if eternity is a presence. The temporary is relevant to the past and future. We're getting close to like 8 billion human beings. And the way 8 billion human beings hold their mind will suggest the future of everything. And you know, it's like when a person realizes we're on a planet in the middle of nowhere, the context is like a meaningless, edgeless space. It's as if like creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere began naming everything. They began defining everything. So technically, meaning is our own brand upon a world too big for shape, too big for measurement. So we are starting from a neutrality of the psyche. That means before a person feels they're unworthy, they're actually in a state where there's neither the concept of worth or its absence. And so if we start from a neutrality, if the meaning of our lives is a projection in the void, then we have choice over the projection. So it means that if a person feels and thinks they're unworthy, they're unworthy. It's like in the void, that's the projection, the reality projection entered. If a person feels worthy, that's the reality. So it's a matter of choice of how the attention in the inner realms is convinced of the value in the outer realms, which then becomes a new emotion. You know, there's this idea of karma. And I think it was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi or someone of the sort, where he's like, what karma means is that your suffering is because of you. And so that means it's like, let's say you're multidimensional being and you're suffering in one dimension, and it's as if like the being's like, why am I suffering in this dimension? And like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is kind of implying that there's more dimensions, and so it's the responsibility of consciousness in accordance to the content it's being present. So it's another way of saying like the concept of karma means that freedom should be caused. It can't be found like an effect. Worthiness cannot be found like an effect. It's a cause. It's starting from a causal position. So it's another way of saying, how are you being before you do something? And the nature of the mind is so incredible that the person can choose to work with real events, or as it is kind of suggested, that in the act of attaining knowledge, a real event is turned into an abstract event. That abstract event is interrelated to all the other possible dimensions. You know, it's as if the knowing of our eyes in one moment can echo into other moments, into other moments. And so I guess I'll end this episode here. final insight that before we are anything, nothing is just me. And perhaps if we reset our moment's value from nothing, then we may become worthy of everything. It's all about where the captain, wants to sail the ship. Where does our attention want to take us? And so we have been the pilots of our life force. We are. I have wondered about, just like a person wonders about their entrance into the world, I have wondered about my exit. And I have wondered, in some sense, when I die, what will die? It's one of the biggest mysteries of my life. That means if there's a person identifying with more than the body, it's as if when the body dies, there's something more still. Let's say a person identifies with the mind, and let's say the body dies and the mind vanishes. It's as if, what else? And if the person is identified with something more than the mind, which is an unknown experience, really. So it's as if, when you're an unknown experiencer in the realm, it's like an unknown experiencer wondering about, what's going to happen when the knowable world leaves. And I have come to this conclusion that the only verb applicable to the unknown, this is why I understand why the ancient mystics were considered, if you were to give mysticism a title, a mystic is a lover of that. And what is love? I would say a trust in that. As much as we move ourselves, I feel poetically the soul wants to be moved. And so without trusting the world, we miss out on what our eyes could be. And so the question comes, or I say the point comes where it's whoever you are, try to leave for your future self the most advanced memories. For when there's an unknown world, we're all worthy of discovering it. We're all worthy of the great love of the species that will bypass extinction. And so there's a freedom to the presence that goes beyond the lack of freedom of the personality. Poetically, only when you can love everything, you can be free from it. Because there's nothing you technically want from it. It's like an acceptance of a grace that was being before our actions are defined. Anyways, guys, I gotta go. Thanks for listening.